I had kept the washrooms of Kale Vantry for 31 years before I ever gave anything a name, and I want that understood first, because it will tell you what kind of woman I was. Not a soft one. Not a woman who wept over the coppers or talked to the linen. I hauled water up the chalk stairs in the dark before the sun cleared the sea, and I hauled it back down gray, and in between I scrubbed the sweat and the smoke and the sour milk out of cloth that belonged to creatures who would sooner have stepped on me than looked at me. That was the work. I was good at it. A person can be good at a small thing for 31 years and never once think it beneath asking whether the small thing is right. The Erie stood on the white cliffs above the Oran Sea, and it was all light. I will say that for it. Whatever else Kale Vantry was, it was never dark. The halls were cut from the chalk and faced with tall arches open to the wind, and the morning came in off the water and lay along the floors in long white bars, and even the deep rooms had shafts bored up through the stone to catch it. The Bright Flight, they called themselves, and they were not wrong about the brightness. Their scales caught the sun and threw it back gold and bronze and river green, and when the great ones spread their wings on the launching ledges, the light came through the membranes like light through a leaf, and I have stood with a basket of wet linen on my hip and forgotten to breathe. I want you to understand they were beautiful. It matters to the rest of it that they were beautiful, and that I knew it, and that I still came to think what I came to think. The washrooms were below, where the light came last and left first, and below the washrooms was the lesser nest. Every Erie has one. I did not know that then. I thought it was our shame alone, and I kept my head down about it the way you keep your head down about a thing you have decided not to look at squarely. The great clutches, the true clutches, the heirs and the daughters of the wing lines, those were raised up in the high nurseries where the sun came first, tended by dragons of standing, sung to, named on the day they broke shell. The lesser nest was for the others, the spares. Here is how it worked, and I set it down plainly because the plainness was the whole cruelty of it. A wing line that mattered could not risk its future on a single egg. Eggs are fragile. Hatchlings sicken. Heirs, even bright ones, fall from ledges or take a fever or simply fail to thrive for reasons no one can name. So the great dams laid more than they meant to keep. The strongest, the true hatched, went up into the light. The rest went down to me. They were kept warm and fed and grown, held in reserve against the day something happened to the one that mattered, a living store, insurance with a heartbeat. If the heir thrived and came of age hale, then the reserve was no longer needed. And then the reserve was returned to the stone. That was the phrase, returned to the stone. I heard it for 30 years before I let myself hear it. They did it kindly by their lights. The great ones came down, and there was a right, and the spare was taken up and away, and it did not come back, and the low room was cleaned and made ready for the next reserve. No one lied about it. It was simply the custom, old as the Erie, and it had a rightness to the ones who kept it. The way a thing can have a rightness only because no one who benefits from it has ever had to sit on the floor of the low room and feed it. The spares were not named. That was the point of them, if you follow me. A name is a claim. A name says this one and not another, this one who cannot be replaced. You do not name a thing you may have to return to the stone, so they were numbered. In my time I fed the third and the fifth and two that were only ever the seventh, one after the other, and I did not weep for any of them, because I had decided long before that I would not, and a decision like that, kept long enough, stops feeling like a decision and starts feeling like the shape of your own face. Then came the 9th. He broke shell in the cold end of the year, out of season, which is how I knew from the start that his dam had laid him only for insurance and had not troubled to time it. The true heir of that line, a bright bronze thing called Vale High Morning, had hatched a season before up in the sun and was thriving by every account, and so the 9th came into the world already surplus, already the answer to a question no one expected to have to ask. He was small. Even for a spare he was small. His scales came in soft and unfinished, dove-gray going to ash at the edges, without the gloss the great ones had, and one of his wings had a fold in the leather that never quite pulled straight, so that when he stretched it there was a pucker at the joint like a seam badly sewn. He was, in the accounting of the eyrie, a poor reserve. A cheap one. The kind they half hoped they would never need and would not much mourn returning. I fed him because feeding him was the work. That first winter I climbed down to the low room 4 times a day with the warm milk mash and the copper heater stones, and I fed him and cleaned him and turned the stones, and I did not talk to him, and I told myself I did not look at him any longer than the others. That was a lie, and I knew it was a lie by the middle of the winter, and I want to tell you the exact moment I knew, because it was such a small thing. He had a way of watching the door. The others had watched the door too. They all learned quickly that the door means food, means warmth, means the one creature in the world that does not step over them, but they watched it the way you watch a spout, waiting for what comes out. The 9th watched it the way you watch for someone. There is a difference, and any woman who has ever come home to a house with a child in it knows the difference in her spine before her mind finds the words. He would hear my step on the chalk stair. I have a heavy step, I always have, and he would come up off the heater stones on his crooked legs and put his soft gray face toward the dark of the doorway. And when the light of my lamp found him, his whole small body would ease, the way a held breath eases, and something in his throat would make a sound I had never heard a spare make. A low 3-note sound, rising, like a question that already trusted the answer. He was waiting for me, not for the food, for me. And I stood in that doorway one gray morning with the milk mash cooling on my hip, and I understood that I had become, to this one small doomed creature, the whole of what the word home could mean, and that I had done it without meaning to, simply by being the thing that always came, and that in the spring the great ones would come down and return him to the stone, and I would clean the low room and make it ready. And I had 31 years of practice at not weeping, and I did not weep. But I set the mash down on the floor, and I sat down on the cold chalk beside him, which I had never done for any of them, and I let him climb up my arm and fold his crooked wing against my neck, and I said the first word I ever said to any of them. I said, "There now." And then, because a woman who has begun cannot always stop where she meant to, I said the second thing. I looked at that soft gray face turned up to mine in the lamplight, ash at the edges, the little seam in his wing, the eyes that had decided I was the world, and the number they had given him rose up in my throat, and I could not say it. I could not call that a number, not with him looking at me like that. It would have been like calling the sunrise a schedule. There was a lamp burning by the door, one of the little clay lamps we used below where the sun came late, and the flame was leaning in the draught, and I looked at it because I could not look at him and think clearly at the same time, and I said, "Wick." That was all. Wick, for the small thing that holds the flame and is not the flame and is not much to look at and is the reason there is any light at all in a low room. I did not decide it. It decided itself, the way his waiting had decided itself. I said it once quiet, and he made the 3-note sound rising, and I have never in my life been so frightened of a thing I had done, because I knew what a name was. A name is a claim. And I had just laid claim, on the cold floor of the lesser nest, to a creature the bright flight intended to return to the stone. I told no one. Of course I told no one. What would I have said, and to whom? I was a wash-house keeper. The great ones did not come below except for the right, and the right was still a season off, and so I had the winter, and I spent it committing the sin of treating a spare like a someone. I named him, and then I could not unname him, and once a thing has a name you find you want to know it, and so I learned him. I learned that the crooked wing did not pain him, but that he was ashamed of it, if a hatchling can be ashamed. He folded it under when he thought I was watching and let it out only when he forgot himself, and I made a point of never once looking at it directly, the way you learn not to look directly at a scar on the face of someone you love. I learned that he liked the copper heater stones warmest just after the mash, that he would drowse then with his throat against the stone and his soft belly rising and falling, and that if I stayed and put my hand flat on his side, he would lay his head over on my wrist, and the 3 notes would come slow and blurred, half asleep, and I would sit on the floor of the low room longer than my knees could well afford, because I was 50 and the chalk was cold and I did not care. I learned that he was clever. This unsettled me more than anything. The spares I had kept before had been slow, dull, the way you would expect a thing to be that no one had ever spoken to. Wick was not slow. When I brought the mash, he learned to watch which of my hands carried it and go to that side. When I hummed, and I did begin to hum to him, lo, the sea songs the washwomen sang over the coppers, because a low room is a lonely place and I was lonely in it too. He learned the shape of the tunes and would rock his crooked wing to them. And once, near the turn of the year, when I stopped humming in the middle of a song to cough, he took up the next few notes himself in that three-note throat of his, wrong and cracked and unmistakably the tune. And I sat back on my heels on the cold floor and I laughed out loud, which I had not done below in years, and I said, "You're a person, aren't you?" And I heard my own voice say it, and it went through me like cold water, because I had not meant to say the true thing, and the true thing once said cannot be sent back down the stair. He was a person. He had been a person the whole time. That was the thing the Eyrie could not afford to know, and the thing I could no longer afford not to. Word climbs. It always climbs in an Eyrie or a town or a family. It finds the shaft that carries the light and it goes up it. I do not know how it started. Perhaps another washwoman heard me humming below and mentioned it above, laughing, that Mad Marta Sill sang to the reserve. Perhaps one of the young dragons who ran errands between the levels heard a name where a name should not be and carried it up the way the young carry anything that might buy them a moment's notice. It does not matter how. By the thaw the word had climbed, and the word was this: the keeper of the lesser nest had named the spare. It came back down to me sideways, the way such things do. The head laundress, a hard old woman named Bisquet who had kept the linen presses longer than I had kept the coppers, came to me at the drying racks one bright morning with her mouth pressed thin, and she did not look at me. She looked at the linen and she said, "They're saying below that you've named it." I said nothing. I turned a sheet on the rack. "You want to unsay it," Bisquet said, still to the linen. "You want to unsay it before the right. A thing without a name is easier for everybody, easier for them." She jerked her chin at the ceiling, meaning the ones above. "Easier for you." She looked at me then, and I saw that it was not cruelty in her face. It was fear, and it was old, and it was for me. "I named one," she said. "Long ago, before your time, I named one, and I don't do this work anymore because I love it, Marta. I do it because I couldn't leave. Unsay it." I did not unsay it. I have asked myself many times since why I did not, when a woman I respected who had walked the same road ahead of me stood at the drying racks and begged me to. And the truest answer I have is not a brave one. It is that it was already too late. You cannot unsay a name any more than you can unsee a face. The Eyrie's whole system rested on a lie so smooth no one had ever had to say it aloud, that a spare was not a someone, that the low room held stock and not children. And I had said the true thing out loud on the cold floor in the lamplight. And once a person has said the true thing out loud, all the unsaying in the world only makes them a person who knows better and does the wrong thing anyway. I would rather have been a fool who named a doomed creature than a coward who unnamed a loved one. So I turned another sheet on the rack and I said, "His name is Wick," and Bisquet closed her eyes, and after a while she went back to the presses, and neither of us spoke of it again. But the next morning there was an extra measure of the good barley milk left at the top of my stair, and no note, and I knew whose it was. The right was set for the first full light of spring, when the Air Vale High Morning would take her place officially in the high wing line, and the reserve against her, being no longer needed, would be returned to the stone. I learned the date the way I learned everything below, late sideways from a passing word. 11 days, then 10, then a week. I went down the chalk stair 4 times a day with the mash and the stones, and I fed Wick and warmed him, and I hummed the sea songs, and I did not tell him. Because how do you tell someone? And because I had begun to hope, in the low stubborn way a person hopes when hopping is all that is left to do with the hands, that I would think of something. I did not think of anything. I was a wash-house keeper. There was nothing to think of. The great ones would come, and there would be the right, and Wick would put his soft gray face toward the door expecting me, and instead the door would fill with the bright flight, and I would not be able to stop it, because you cannot stop the sun with a bucket. On the 9th day before the rite, I sat on the cold floor with him drowsing against my wrist, and I did the thing I had sworn 31 years before I would never do below. I wept, quietly so as not to wake him. And he woke anyway, the way they do, and he lifted his head and looked at the water on my face with those eyes that had decided I was the world, and he made the 3 notes, low and worried, and he reached up with the crooked wing, the one he was ashamed of, the one he hid, and he laid the puckered leather of it against my wet cheek, gently, the way I laid my hand flat on his side to settle him, giving me back the only comfort he had ever been given. And I understood that whatever the great ones thought they were returning to the stone, it was not stock. It had a whole heart in it. It had learned tenderness from a scrubwoman on a cold floor, and it was spending that tenderness on her now. And if that is not a person, then I do not know what the word is for. I made up my mind that night, though I could not have told you to make up my mind to what. Only that when the door filled with the bright flight I would be between it and him. That was the whole of my plan. A 50-year-old washwoman with cracked knees, standing between a hatchling and a hierarchy older than the chalk. It was not a plan. It was just where my feet had decided to be. They came at first light, as the custom said, and the sun came down the shaft into the low room and lay in a white bar across the floor, and Wick woke and heard the steps on the stair, many steps, wrong steps, heavy, and he came up off the heater stones and put his face toward the door the way he did for me, hopeful, and the 3 notes started in his throat, and then the door filled and the notes stopped, because it was not me. The damn matriarch Orith Sunmorrow came into the low room first, and behind her the wing of her attendants, and the light that came off her was the light I had stood forgetting to breathe over for 31 years. She was enormous in that small space, bronze going to old gold along the spine, her scales worn smooth as riverstone at the shoulders where the sun had struck them for a century, and her eyes were the flat ancient amber of a creature who has never in her long life had to wonder whether she was a someone. She looked at the low room the way you look at a store cupboard. She looked at me the way you look at a bucket left where it should not be. And she looked at Wick, at the numbered spare, at the ash-gray surplice with the crooked wing, and she said, in a voice like a slow tide over shingle, "This is the reserve." It was not a question. She had come to do a right and ordinary thing, a thing done in this room 100 times before her and would be done 100 times after, and I was a small obstruction in the doing of it, and she had already, in the flat amber of her eyes, begun to step over me. And I did not move. "Keeper," said one of the attendants, a sleek young thing near the door, "stand aside, the right." "His name is Wick," I said. I had not planned to say it. I have told you I had no plan, but it came out of me flat and plain, the way I had said it to Biscay at the drying racks, and it fell into that bright, terrible little room and lay there in the white bar of sun, and the whole wing of them went still. The matriarch turned the flat amber of her eyes fully on me for the first time. I felt it the way you feel the sun come out from behind a cloud, a physical weight of attention, and I understood that she was seeing me now, the actual bucket, and that this was worse and not better. "It has no name," she said. "The reserve is not named. That is the custom." "I know the custom," I said. My voice shook. I let it shake. "I've kept this room 31 years. I know the custom better than anyone alive above the washrooms, and I broke it. His name is Wick. I gave it to him in the winter on this floor, and he knows it and he'll come to it. He's a someone. He's been a someone the whole time you've called him a something, and you can return me to the stone with him if you like. But you can't make me stand aside and pretend the low room's got stock in it when it's got a child." I do not know where the words came from. They were not words a wash-house keeper had any business having. I think they had been building in me all winter, note by note, the way his 3-note song had built, and they simply came, And when they were out, I was more frightened than I had ever been, and I got down on the cold floor between the matriarch and Wick, and I held out my arm the way I did 4 times a day, and I said, not to her, to him, "There now. Come on then. There now." And Wick, surplus, numbered, ashamed of his own wing, came across the white bar of sun on his crooked legs, past the enormous bronze presence of the dam of his own line, past the whole bright terrible wing of them, and he climbed up my held-out arm the way he had every day of his short life, and he folded the puckered leather of his crooked wing against my neck where he always hid it, and he made the 3 notes, low and rising, the question that already trusted the answer, and he laid his head over on my wrist. The low room was very quiet. The sun came down the shaft and made the dust turn slowly in the air. I did not look up at the matriarch. I could not. I sat on the cold floor with the named spare against my neck, and I waited to be returned to the stone, and the silence went on so long that I began to hear the sea, far below, working at the foot of the cliffs the way it had worked since before there was an eyrie or a custom or a low room to keep. Then the damn matriarch Orith Sunmorrow did a thing I had never seen a great one do, and have not seen since. She lowered her enormous head. Not to me, I want to be clear, this was not the mass kneeling the stories tell, the whole flight bowing to the scrub woman, and it was not that, it was smaller and worse and better than that. She lowered her head slowly until the flat ancient amber of her eyes was level with the soft gray face of the hatchling tucked against my neck, and she looked at him, actually looked, the way I had learned to look on the cold floor in the lamplight, the way you look at a someone and not a something, and I watched the flatness go out of her eyes. I watched 100 years of custom meet one small named creature at eye level, and I watched the custom lose. Whatever she had come down the stair to do, she could not do it now. You cannot return a name to the stone. You can only return a number, and there was no number here anymore. I had spent it. I had spent it in the winter, and there was no getting it back, and she knew it, and I saw her know it, and I saw the terrible ancient tiredness of a creature realizing that a thing she has done 100 times was 100 times wrong. "Wick," she said. Just the once. Slow, over shingle. She said the name I had given him, and the saying of it changed it, because a thing is truly named when someone with the power to unname it chooses not to, and she chose not to, and I felt the choice go through the whole bright wing of them like the tide turning. Wick lifted his head off my wrist. He looked at the matriarch. And then, because he was clever, because he was a person, because I had hummed the sea songs to him all winter and he knew the shape of a greeting when he heard one, he answered her in his cracked 3-note voice, wrong and unmistakable, and I heard the whole flight draw breath, because he had answered the damn matriarch as an equal answers, as a someone answers a someone, and no one struck him down, and the sun came down the shaft, and it was the brightest that low room had ever been. They did not perform the rite. I will not pretend it was simple after, because it was not, and I do not trust an ending that comes too clean. There was argument above. I heard the edges of it for days, the way you hear weather over the water. There were old ones who said the custom was the custom, and a scrubwoman's sentiment was no reason to unmake a thing older than the chalk, and there were others, younger, or perhaps only more tired of a rightness that had always required someone else to sit on the cold floor with the thing being made right upon. I was not part of the argument. I was a wash-house keeper. But I have come to think that the argument was already lost the moment the matriarch got down to eye level, because you cannot win an argument for a custom once you have looked, actually looked, at the someone the custom eats. She had looked. She could not look away again. That is the only power I have ever had in my life, and it is a strange one to name. I could not make the great ones kind, but I could make them look, and looking did the rest. Here is what came of it, and it is less than the stories would give you, and more than I ever thought to hope. The lesser nest was not closed, and Eyrie needs its reserves, and I have learned since that some things are older than any one woman can pull up by the root in a single spring. But it was changed. They come down now, the ones of standing down the chalk stair into the light that comes late, and they sit. I have watched them, it costs them something, and I am glad it costs them something. They sit on the cold floor with the reserve, and they learn them and they name them. It is a poor rule still. I would tear the whole custom out if the tearing were mine to do. But a spare that is named and known and sat with on the cold floor is not so easily returned to the stone, because a name is a claim, and they have all had to learn now what I learned in the winter, that a claim once made cannot be sent back down the stair. It is slower than justice. It is only mercy, working the way mercy works, one looked-at face at a time. I have made my peace with it being slow. I am 52 now, and I have learned that slow and real beats fast and false, in linen, and in this both. And Wick, he did not go up into the high nurseries. I want to tell you he was revealed to be a secret prince, that the crooked wing hid royal blood, that the surplice was the true heir all along. The stories love that turn, and I understand why. It lets the great ones off. It makes the kindness pay in coin the eyrie already respected. But it was not so, and I am glad it was not so, because it would have made him worth saving for the wrong reason. He was worth saving because he was a someone. That was the whole of it. Not because he was secretly gold under the ash, because ash is enough, because the low room was enough, and the 3 notes were enough, and a person is not made worth keeping by being secretly something grander. A person is worth keeping because a person is worth keeping. And if the bright flight learned one thing on the cold floor of my low room, I would have it be that. He grew. The crooked wing never pulled fully straight, and he stopped hiding it, which was the change in him I loved most, because it meant he had stopped being ashamed of the part of himself the world had called a flaw, and there is no gift I would rather have given anyone. He is bigger than me now, which is a strange thing, to have a creature you fed off your own arm on the cold floor come to fold a wing over you that could shade a cart. He comes down the chalk stair still. He has no need to. He has a place in the light now, a real one, earned the slow, real way. But he comes down most mornings, and he finds me at the coppers with the steam rising and the sea songs going, and he puts his soft gray face, gray still, ash still. No gold ever came, down to my level the way the matriarch once did, and he makes the 3 notes, low and rising, the question that already trusted the answer. And I say what I have always said, what I said first on the cold floor in the lamplight with the number stuck in my throat. I say there now. And that is the truest thing I know, after 52 years and 31 of them spent hauling water in the dark, that the whole of it, all of it, the eyrie and the custom and the bright terrible wing of them and the sea working at the foot of the cliffs, the whole of it turned once on one tired woman refusing to call a someone a something. I did not save him with strength. I had none. I did not save him with cleverness or with a plan. I saved him with a name, said once, quiet, in a low room where no one important was ever meant to hear it. And I have come to believe that is how most of the real saving in the world gets done. Not up in the light where the great ones spread their wings, but down on the cold floor, by the ones who always come, saying the true thing out loud when it would be so much easier to keep hauling water and looking away. I named him Wick, for the small thing that holds the flame and is not much to look at, and is the reason there is any light at all. I would do it again. I would do it 100 times, on 100 cold floors, and let them return me to the stone. There now,